I'm Chris Stafford, and this is AART the Podcast, where we meet the women behind their art.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
This week, mixed media artist Rebecca Youssef. Rebecca was born in Lebanon, Pennsylvania in 1973. The daughter of teachers Chick and Linda Hess, she's the middle of 3 children. She has an older brother and younger sister. Art runs in her family in different mediums. Her sister and a cousin are graphic artists. An aunt was a fashion designer, and her paternal grandmother was a hobby painter. At the age of 9, her family moved to Hawaii, where Rebecca began to appreciate the connection between nature and nurture. She developed her interest in gardening and arboriculture, which established the foundation for her focus on ecoculture. Her love of trees and nature is reflected in her work as she strives to bring awareness to the importance of sustainable art. She says, "I've been an avid gardener since the age of 10. Even then, I recall understanding the importance of growing and nurturing native plants. I was already in awe of California's lush topography and knew that a balanced ecosystem was key to survival for all its members." Rebecca graduated from the University of Arizona in Tucson with a Bachelor in Fine Arts and a Master's in Art Education from Loyola Marymount University, Los Angeles. After college, she worked as a graphic artist and in fashion before teaching art. She met her husband, Ike, in LA, where they live with their 3 children, Andrew, Caroline, and Margaret. Rebecca returned to art 7 years ago, and after initially finding it a challenge, once she found how her art belonged in her soul and with her eco-friendly values, she settled into what has become her niche: using natural materials and sustainable practices for eco-conscious mixed media art. She says, "Beautiful things can be made by working with the planet, not taking from it. As the saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and Rebecca has proved how waste can be transformed into beauty. A cultivator of native California oak trees, her family's acorn project has seen over 25,000 acorns planted in the Santa Monica Mountains over the past 10 years. Rebecca is currently an artist in residence at the 18th Street at the Airport Art Complex in Santa Monica, California." Rebecca, you were actually born in Pennsylvania and moved to Hawaii at a very young age. I want to start with what you remember of your days as a very young child in Pennsylvania.
I remember a lot. My family is still all on the East Coast. We were sort of outliers. We have a very, very large family, and we are the only ones to leave, to leave the East. And we moved out to Hawaii when I was 9. Leaving, yes, this big family behind, and it was a really, really big change.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 2 siblings, but my father is one of 8, and so just a lot of cousins, a lot of cousins.
Judging by what you do now, Rebecca, I'm wondering if you were one of those children that grabbed anything from the outdoors and brought it inside, much to the chagrin of your mother, perhaps.
You know, we had a lot of freedom when we were kids. I mean, my parents were the type that just said, "Be home for dinner." And so we would go out climbing trees, just all over the neighborhood until, it started to get dark out, and then we knew we had to be home for dinner. So there was a lot of freedom, a lot of exploring, imagination. It was really great. It was really ideal. And I grew up on a street that had a lot of kids on it. And yeah, it was just really fun, really joyful.
Were you creative in the outdoors? Did you, you know, that, because obviously you have a strong connection to nature. So I'm wondering what the catalyst was for that.
Yeah. When I was really young, it was mostly just climbing trees, building forts in bushes, doing little backyard camp outs. It was really just kind of organic play in nature.
And what about animals? Did you have pets? Did you go looking for wildlife? Were you that kind of child to, jump in the stream and fish and collect frogs and things like that?
Yes, yes. I always loved animals, but my father did not want any pets. And so it was funny because every time my grandfather would come to visit, he would say, every child should grow up with a dog. It teaches them responsibility. But my dad always said no. But whenever there was, we found a bird that fell out of its nest or, damaged its wing, people would bring them to my father, and my dad would actually nurse them back to health. So I remember that as a kid, having somebody finding a bird and bringing it to our house so that, we could get it back on its feet. So, and I loved that. And then I just had that experience a few weeks ago where I found my neighbor was trimming their tree and a hummingbird nest fell out. And she said, "Oh my gosh, what do I do? There's this baby there's this baby bird." And I said, "Well, try and feed it." And she's like, "Oh, no. And I said, "Okay, I'll be right over." And so I picked it up, and for 10 days, I had this little baby hummingbird living in my house, and we nursed it back to health. And a couple weeks ago, she flew away. It was so sad, but yet so gratifying.
And given your love of trees and woods, did you learn the different types of trees and plants and things at an early age?
I didn't really pay attention then. I knew some just because the town that I lived in Pennsylvania was called Lebanon. Often, pronounced Lebanon, but we pronounce it Lebanon. And we had a lot of cedar trees. And so the mascot of the town was the cedar tree, the local high school. They were the Cedars, much like I think in Lebanon, there's a lot of cedar trees. And so I was kind of aware like that, but no, I didn't actually seek that out. That came later.
And so you grew up in a town rather than in the countryside. Did you gravitate to the countryside then in nature? I'm just trying to piece this together, Rebecca, of how you clearly found this sort of association with nature and with all things sustainable. To where was the beginning of that journey, do you think?
I think my grandfather had a huge garden when I was growing up. And I loved being out in the garden with him. It felt like an enormous garden, but he grew all kinds of fruits and vegetables. And I remember being out in the garden with him once, and he was picking some tomatoes, and he said, "Here, try this." And he handed me a tomato, and I looked at it what am I supposed to do with this? He goes, "Just take a bite." And I took a bite of this tomato, and I remember it was the best tasting tomato I ever had. And I just thought it was so cool that he grew that. And then right after we moved to Hawaii, I had a neighbor who was really into gardening, and her front yard was so beautiful. She had a lot of native Hawaiian plants and flowers in her yard. And I would always be just looking at all her flowers, and she would give me cuttings. and just kind of showed me basic propagation. In Hawaii, if you cut anything and put it in the ground, it pretty much grows. I mean, it's so easy to grow plants there. But she got me started on a little garden. And that was when I was, I don't know, in about fifth grade, fourth or fifth grade. And yeah, I've just always loved gardening. There's something about taking a seed or taking a little clip of something and getting it to grow that I've always just loved.
And what kind of things do you enjoy growing now? I know you have your thing with trees, but I'm just thinking of the garden. What is it you grow in the garden now?
Right now, I'm mostly focused on trees, native California trees, oaks, black walnut, California buckeyes. But I'm currently in the middle of replacing, I have a little patch of grass in my front yard, and I'm replacing it, taking it all out, and I'm planting a pollinator garden to attract butterflies, bees, and birds. And I'm going to have it all California natives. We have a lot of invasive species around in California right now. They're sort of taking over and booting out the natives. And it's because we have a lot of, I wouldn't say they're invasive. A lot of the bees that we have, like honeybees, were imported from Europe. And so we have these kind of imported bees pollinating invasive species that are, just kind of taking over. So I'm going to try and do my part and just plant a native California pollinator garden.
We're going to go there later on in the podcast, Rebecca, but let's just flip back to Hawaii and why the move to Hawaii as a child.
My father grew up in Philadelphia, and his best friend, who lived across the street from him when they were kids, moved out to Hawaii in the 70s and just kept saying, you got to come out here. You got to get off the East Coast. And my father and his friend were both teachers at the time. And so we went out to visit when I was, 9. My parents fell in love with it. I mean, it's Hawaii. What's not to love? And so we went back to Pennsylvania, packed up our house, and moved out to Hawaii. Just like that.
And what were your first impressions then as a child?
Oh, it was a little bit of culture shock. The East Coast, there's an East Coast sensibility that, I definitely felt like a fish out of water when we first got to Hawaii. I remember we moved to Hawaii the night before school started. So I was going into fourth grade. My parents dropped me off at my new elementary school. And as I'm walking into the classroom, I see just a slew of shoes right as you entered the classroom. So everybody took off their shoes. And I didn't know what to do. I just thought, why is everyone taking off their shoes? And I didn't know about the custom of, removing your shoes before you enter a home or even a classroom at this time. And so I remember taking off, I like unlacing my shoes. Everybody else was wearing flip-flops and stuff. And I'm like unlacing my shoes. And then I thought, am I going to get these back? Like what happens? And so just like little things like that. It was so funny. But yeah, it's just different.
Was your father Chick? Was he a teacher in Hawaii then? Is that where he continued his teaching career?
So he was teaching physical education at a high school, and he was also the high school basketball coach when we were in Pennsylvania. And when we came out to Hawaii, he got a job as the assistant basketball coach at the local university. So he stopped teaching high school because really his passion was coaching. He was a basketball coach through and through. And my mother was a teacher though, and she continued to teach at the local high school. I actually had her in 10th grade for English.
Your mother, Linda, what else did she teach apart from English?
Well, yeah, just English and English as a second language for a while. But yeah, she was just the North Shore of Oahu is pretty small, and so there's one high school up there, and so it was quite common to have my friends or neighbors, parents teach at the high school. So I had my best friend's mom was the librarian. The other one was my history teacher. So it was kind of funny. Small town.
How was it making friends then with such a big cultural shock and on an island far from the home that you grew up in?
Mm-hmm. At first, it was tough. It's always tough being the new kid. And I didn't like being the new kid. We had never moved before, so that was a new experience. And the North Shore at the time was predominantly Polynesian. And it took a little, I think them warming up to me, a foreigner. But once, the locals do warm up to you, they are the most generous people. So, yeah.
How did you spend your time?
Hawaii, I mean, it was a pretty idyllic childhood. I mean, the beach is right down the street. I grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of kids, a lot of kids. So it was just fun. Yeah, it was great.
And explorations, I would imagine, into, nature and all that Hawaii had to offer. Where did your interest then start to develop in nature and in all of the recyclable elements that you now use in art?
Well, I think the recycling came first as a necessity, because when I was younger, my parents being teachers, they didn't have a lot of money, a lot of disposable income to be, buying art supplies. So, I sort of had to be resourceful. And I think that's how it started. Yeah, more out of necessity. You find a way.
And when you left high school, you went to the University of Arizona. Talk about that. Was that a natural choice to study for a fine arts degree?
No, I did not plan on studying art. I was undecided about what to study when I went off to college. And I remember my parents telling me to choose a profession that's always in demand. The world always needs teachers or nurses. And so I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. So in college, I really didn't know what I wanted to study. So I just took a bunch of different classes. But I found I loved anything related to the arts and horticulture. So I took theater, architecture, art history, botany classes. And when I took my first painting class, that's when I felt like, oh, this is what I should be doing. And so I became a painting and ceramics major. My parents weren't super supportive of me wanting to study art. In fact, I didn't even tell them for about a year or so that I switched my major to art, because I knew they'd kind of be upset.
What was their reaction?
At first, my father said, well, I just, what are you going to do with this? You need a skill. And eventually they just kind of dropped it. They both realized, you really just got to do what you love. And my father is somebody who, he is so passionate about basketball still to this day. He's about to turn 80 and he still will sit with his clipboard with the X's and O's mapping out plays like to this day. So it is still something that it's just so with him. And so, yeah, they've realized like, all right, at the end of the day, you got to follow your passion. You got to do what you love. So now they're supportive.
So now the passion of art, obviously you chose the right degree there because it became your life, your livelihood. What elements of that degree did you most enjoy, and what were your biggest takeaways from college life and the art that you learned there?
Well, I loved my studies. Loved studying art and art history. The University of Arizona is in the Sonoran Desert. And there's just something about the desert that attracts artists. So I was fortunate to have some really amazing professors that encouraged me to experiment and to make a lot of crazy, bad art. I painted on just about anything I could find. That's when I discovered like Louise Nevelson. And I started using found objects. Plus, I really couldn't afford a lot of art supplies because, as we all know, traditional art supplies are really expensive. So again, I had to be resourceful. I used shipping pallets, found wood, sheet metal, the corrugated sheet metal. I would just kind of find that was discarded. And then the local thrift store sold old and presumably used hospital sheets that I would buy for 50 cents to use as canvas to paint on, which is something, you would never hear of today. In a post-pandemic world, nobody is going to be selling, used hospital sheets, but I loved them because they also had the hospital name stamped on them. And I just thought they were great. And, you gesso it up and it's fine. You can paint on it. And,
who would have thought?
Yeah. The local hardware store would always sell, discounted paint that was returned, like the oops section. And I had a really great professor who said, don't ever buy gesso. Don't waste your money. Buy flat latex house paint. It's all you need. And to this day, I still shop the returned paint section at the hardware store because it's just a little gold mine. I love flat latex paint. It's great.
And what was your space like at that time? Did you have a studio space that was dedicated to collecting all these pieces?
At school, the painting studio was large. It was really big. And, we all had sections to store quite a bit of stuff. So that was never a problem. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how much space you had as a studio when you were starting off.
Yeah, no, it was just all at school. And the painting studios were really large. It was communal. So you're sharing it with the other students in your class, but they were large. It was like big, nice, open, high ceiling spaces. So yeah, it was never a problem. All my junk I would haul to the studio.
Yeah, because this, I can imagine, takes up quite a bit of space, but it enabled you to think big then in terms of your projects.
Yeah. And I did. I worked quite large back then.
What sort of sizes would some of your pieces have been? Give us some examples.
I I think the largest were probably around maybe 50 by 70 inches. So, I mean, that's a good size for me. Even to this day, I don't usually go over 70 inches. So, yeah, it's nice. It's fun to work big. But now I have a problem of storage. So now I actually have to think of that. But back then I didn't. It was crazy.
So from Hawaii then to Tucson for school. And at what point then did you decide to move to LA to pursue your MA?
I traveled after college. I went to Europe for a few months and backpacked around Europe and got to see all the art that I had studied for the last 4 years. So that was really fun. And then came back to the States. Actually, I went back to school for a short time, and took a lot of graphic design classes. And my first job out of college was as a graphic designer, because I never really thought I would become an artist. I didn't really know what exactly I would do. And so I was just kind of trying out a lot of stuff. I was a graphic designer for a time. I was a clothing designer for a time. I tried my hat at being an actor for a time. I was just kind of bouncing around, seeing what fit. And then I really I kept up a studio practice the whole time. You know, I had a little studio space in my garage and I kept painting, but I just never thought like I would come back to it and then do it as a career. I just thought, oh, I'll just keep it for my own personal enjoyment.
Were you selling anything at that time?
No, I didn't even think to sell it at that time. I was just doing it for me.
Who were your early influences then? Which artists could you single out now that had an impact on your journey?
In art school, I was, I think, obsessed with Robert Rauschenberg, Richard Tuttle, Agnes Martin, Julie Meritu. Oh, there's so many. I think I always wanted to paint like Agnes Martin, but yeah, because she's, just that like crisp, linear, minimal. I loved it. And my work, my personal style sort of vacillates between wanting to be very gestural and loose, but then I kind of always revert to hard lines and geometrics patterns. So it's kind of interesting. There's kind of always this tension in my work as I go back and forth between the two.
Now, you chose to do your master's in art education at the Research University in LA, Loyola Marymount University. What did you take away from that journey then through your master's that impacted and influenced your style and the eye that you were developing?
I think going to grad school was a different. I was kind of seeing art through a different lens. Because when I was in undergrad, I was creating art that was really about me, very self-referential and how I saw the world. And when I went to grad school, how many years later was it? 8 years later, 7 years later, I think the art curriculum, art education had changed a bit, and there was like a shift away from that self-centered art to more purpose-driven art. And because I used to make art that was all about my world, my thoughts. And now I was learning to make art that was more focused on the world and what my place and purpose is in it. It was kind of more big picture. And I think that purpose-driven approach to art making also helped me marry the ecological awareness to my art practice.
And as a young adult, of course, your political views would be developing. I'm wondering what the student, Rebecca Youssef, was like. Were you the activist? Were you the feminist? How was your personality developing that would impact and influence your art and your style and your political views?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the work that I created as an undergrad was, it was very personal issues that hit close to home. Mm-hmm. And some themes were, I grew up in a very strict Catholic household, and there was some, I did a piece that was, sort of about that. I also worked at a local college bar at the time. Actually, almost all through college, I worked. And during the day, it was a restaurant. And at night, it turned into like a college bar. But during the day, because City Hall was just down the road a few blocks, we would get a lot of guys coming for lunch from City Hall. So they would come in their, suit and ties. And I just the interactions with them was, it always just kind of felt weird. Kind of how they talked to me, how they kind of looked at me, or maybe even looked down at me, and, would call me, even though I had my little name tag on, they would just call me, honey or sweetie or, stuff like that. I was just like, ew. And so I started creating a lot of work around that power dynamic. These guys who are, they work at City Hall and they're in their suit, and I'm a waitress. And it just, that power dynamic weighed on me, and I didn't like it. And so I put that into my work, and I made a lot of pieces about that.
Were you rebellious?
I don't know if I was rebellious. I was just so open to everything. I had a really amazing professor who was probably the most feared in the art department. He was pretty gruff. He was a little grumpy. He reminded me so much of my father. And so I really took a shine to him. And he really instilled in us to look at what's going on around you and, sort of like the paradox in pull out the paradoxes that you're just seeing in everyday life and comment on that. And so he really instilled that the content piece to my work, because I don't think you have to always create work that means something, but when it does, and when you tap into that, it definitely makes the work a lot more interesting.
What did your teachers say about you?
Well, that professor wrote my grad school recommendation. So he did say some very nice things, which was nice to hear. Shout out to Chuck Hittner from the University of Arizona. He was the greatest professor I think I've ever had. Such a great mentor. Who's still painting today. He's still living in Tucson, and he's still painting, doing his thing. He works on screens, like screens from, go on windows. He's been painting acrylic on screens for decades.
So when you graduated with your master's, what was on your mind then, Rebecca? What were you thinking life could be like for you?
As much as I always was thinking like, oh, it'd be so great to be an artist, but that's just so impractical. And so I got my master's in art education so that I could teach. And even though I really wanted to get my MFA, but I just thought, okay, well, you already have a BFA. What are you then going to do with an MFA? And so I got my MA instead, thinking it was more practical and the safe route.
And the route to where?
Well, I did teach for a while. I taught all levels. When I was in grad school, I taught actually preschoolers at the on-campus preschool. That was fun, teaching art to preschoolers. And I taught middle school and then high school art, painting and drawing. And I loved teaching, but it made me miss my own art practice. And so I stopped teaching when I had my first child. And then I took some time off to raise 3 kids. And then, kind of all roads led to, I really need to get back to my own art practice. And so 7, 8 years ago, I did just that.
So when and where did you meet your husband, Ike?
We met out here in Los Angeles. We were set up by his college roommate.
And what was he doing? What does he do now?
He is in the music business. He is on the business side of the music business, and he has a music media company called Gamma Media, and they are mostly in hip hop music. And so you'll hear more about them. It's a new company. They just started about 5 months ago, so they're growing.
And just as your 3 children are, growing up in a household with music and arts and culture surrounded by it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to where you actually started now, when you said you picked up your art and to do your own thing. What were your intentions then? How did you feel that you were best be describing yourself as an artist? And did you have some goals, some ambitions?
It's funny. So after I had my children, I remember I really wanted to sort of get back into my practice, but and I found little ways, to kind of massage my creative outlet. I did a lot of projects for their schools and, auction items I would create for fundraising, stuff like that. And it sort of tied me over. But when they were all in school and I could get back to, focus more on my own art making, I found it was really hard jumping back in, even though I had so many ideas. I remember laying in bed, like one night, just tired with a newborn, and I'd be creating in my head, like, oh, one day I'm going to get back to painting and this is what I'm going to make. But the transition back was really hard. I felt a little lost, and all these ideas that I had marinating, having ideas is one thing, execution is another. And so even though, I had a degree in art and I had my master's in teaching art, I kind of felt like I lost my creative mojo. So there was a local artist in my neighborhood who lived a few blocks away, who did workshops. And I was like, you know what? I need a little help getting back going. And so I took one of her classes, and it was a mark making slash collage class. And when I was in art school, collage was really sort of frowned upon. It was considered craft. It was not high art. And that has totally changed. I mean, now collage is really, um, come a long way. And so I took a workshop with her, and I really credit her with kind of just getting me tapped back into, um, just a creative direction. And that just set me off. Yeah, it was a little humbling, like, oh, I do have these degrees, and yet I'm going to go take a workshop on, how to make marks. Like, this is ridiculous, but it was the greatest. And I encourage anyone, set your ego aside and keep taking classes, keep learning, because that was great, the best.
So your politics were obviously influenced the direction with your passion for eco art and sustainability and using recycled materials. All of these things were merging together to create the artist that you are now. How did it all begin then, when you started literally putting pieces together with these collages, and you making things from paper and cardboard and wood and as you say, the canvases from reclaimed textiles? Give us an idea of where this journey was going and how you monetized it, how you realized that, okay, I can create art my way that aligned with my politics, and I can make it profitable.
Yeah, I sort of had a crisis of conscience a few years ago. I love working on paper. I love paper. But my love of trees was sort of in direct conflict with that. And so I couldn't buy commercially made paper anymore. I just felt like, for me, I had to find a workaround. And so I started using, salvaged cardboard, which is in infinite supply. If you just start noticing cardboard, you'll notice it's everywhere. Paper bags I amassed during the pandemic, because the markets here wouldn't allow you to bring your cloth or reusable bags. And so I started seeing paper bags pile up and thought, wow, I really need to do something with those. Because recycling is not enough. I mean, we think putting things in the recycle bin is like, okay, all good. But, let's try not to recycle. Let's try to just not create waste. So I started using the paper bags. My children, when they were on Zoom school during the pandemic, were printing out reams of paper. I mean, they were just having to print out every day assignments, blah, blah, blah. And I was just tearing my hair out. I thought, oh my gosh, this is so bad. And so I researched how to make paper. And YouTube is a wonderful thing. You can learn anything on YouTube. And so I learned the traditional method of making handmade paper and turned my backyard into a little paper mill. And so it all was about trying to have a zero waste art practice. And I'm not there by 100% by any means. And, but it's something I'm always thinking about. And so now I want my work to serve as a conversation starter around environmental issues and showcase the longevity of these materials I use beyond their initial function, giving them sort of a second life. And I really like to play around and challenge the definition of value and beauty. What makes something valuable? And can a low status utilitarian material like cardboard be elevated to something of beauty and deemed valuable? That's a theme I'm really interested in. And it spills over into all the reforestation work I do with planting trees. How do I get people to value trees, to see them as a necessity and not something that's merely decorative? So yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap between the two.
How did you establish a value then for your work from all of these natural materials? I'm just curious because artists often have difficulty in putting a price on their art.
Right. Yeah. And parting with their art. I know when I first got out of art school, I couldn't part with any of my work. And I think that's because, well, in art school, you experiment so much. So when you build something, using used palettes, you think, well, I may never do that again. So I want to hang on to that. But then, now that I've been in my own practice and I'm pretty prolific, I don't have any difficulty parting with my work. I do save some from each collection, but I think also I've gotten to the point where I'm not afraid of pushing my work to the point of possibly ruining it. I've been really cautious in the past, and now I'm just kind of going for it. And I really know what my work's about. And I guess it comes down to sort of how you measure success. When I first started selling my work, the amount of sales was the natural barometer of success, but that of course can be really tricky as sales are very uneven, and when they plateau, you kind of think, oh, something wrong with the work. And so now, yeah, I just feel like I've found my lane, my niche, my wheelhouse, whatever you want to call it. And the work I'm producing just feels good to my soul. And I feel like when you can tap into that well, it sustains the work for a very long time. And I think that's even more important than finding your style. There's a lot of preoccupation with finding your style. And I think finding the source of inspiration and why that's your source is what artists just starting out should be more focused on and trying to excavate. Because once you tap into that, or at least once I tapped into it, once I figured out how to marry my environmental interests and concerns, etc., into my art, it was like magic.
Mm-hmm. So how do you define success then?
Well, it's changed. Like I said, when you first start selling work, the sales is what you think is how you measure success. But yeah, when the sales plateau and you start to think like, okay, well, what's not working? And you look at what has sold and maybe I need to do more work in that vein. Yeah, that gets a little dicey when you start creating out of demand instead of what feels good. it's never a good thing. When I got back into painting, I worked with an interior designer who bought a lot of work from me. And I thought, wow, this is great. I'm just getting back into my practice and I'm already selling all this work. This is awesome. And she started commissioning work. I'd like something like this, but using this color palette. And then, let's do this composition again, but like take out that bit and blah, blah, blah. And so she started sort of engineering the work and I was just executing. And after a while, it just didn't feel good. It got boring and I didn't identify with the work. Like it wasn't my own. And it reminded me of my first job out of art school when I was a graphic designer, which I hated. Because I felt like a hired gun. I was told, okay, this is what we want. So make it. And so I stopped doing that kind of work. If the work doesn't feel authentic to me, my values, I can't do it anymore. Yeah.
Now let's talk about your love of trees, Rebecca, and the Family's Acorn project now. Because this is quite significant and it's something meaningful and sustainable, and I'm sure something you're enormously passionate about in your preservation and your love of trees. So tell us how that came about and what it involves now.
Well, I started collecting acorns about almost a decade ago. My family and I were at a local park that has tons of oak trees. And I saw on the ground, the ground was littered with tons and tons of acorns. And I just remember picking some up and my youngest, she was, how old was she? About 4 or 5 at the time, was starting to pick them up. And I just thought, what are these? Like, I didn't even put it together that acorns came from oak trees. And then because I love to garden and grow things, I thought, I wonder if I could grow this. And so we took up a whole bunch of them home. And, I found out what they were. I was, these are acorns. I, again, like YouTubed, how do you germinate acorns? And I found the process to be really easy. And I started, growing some in pots. And then the next year we went out, we foraged a whole bunch more, filling up, shopping bags. And it just kind of grew out of control. So now I now have a mini refrigerator that is dedicated to the acorns because you have to put them in cold storage until the rains come in the winter. And so to house all these acorns, my family revolted. They're like, there's no food in our refrigerator. It's all acorns. So I had to buy a little mini fridge and that's where I keep them. And this season, I think I planted a little over 8,000. So in total, we're probably up to, over 25,000 now.
And this is something that's involved the whole family.
Yes. As my children get older, I will admit that they are not as excited to do it as they once were, but they still will help me. We go out, we forage every September, October. And then the acorns go into cold storage for about a month or so until they start to germinate. And then we plant them in the canyon behind our house that we've been planting them in the canyon for a long time. But 3 years ago, there was a devastating fire that burned everything in this canyon. So it was like starting from scratch. And it was kind of became my mission to reforest this canyon behind us. And then just on hiking trails and local parks, I always, take some acorns with me and plug them into the hillsides. And there's one hiking trail I go on that I still, like, under this bush, I can still see some of my saplings growing. And it's really, really gratifying. Los Angeles is losing its tree canopy, much like a lot of other cities and places that are experiencing a lot of development. Our urban tree canopy is disappearing. And this is a city that is getting hotter every summer. We've experienced, a devastating drought. And now wildfires are a threat. Whereas when I first moved to Los Angeles, I heard of wildfires happening in, forests or, out in Malibu. Malibu's like a glutton for punishment. They always have something going on there. But to have a fire on the west side of Los Angeles, was unheard of even 10 years ago. And so now it's here to stay. It's a constant threat. And trees are an easy way to help mitigate the effects of climate change. And so, I'm just trying to do my part and bring back LA's urban tree canopy.
And I read for each piece of art that you plant an oak sapling in its honor.
I do. And actually probably about 5.
There's never any objection to this then? Nobody comes and taps you on the shoulder and say, hey, what are you doing?
No, because oak trees are native to this area and they're illegal to cut down. Like you had to go through a pretty rigorous permitting process to be able to cut down an oak tree. They're protected. No, nobody has ever said anything. I plant acorns close to where they were foraged from. So if I forage from this canyon, all those acorns go back into this canyon. So I plant locally. And our native oak trees are fire hardy. So a lot of the oak trees survived the fire. There's some that didn't, some of the older ones. But a lot of them survived because their bark is so thick to protect them from fire. And even when they do burn, they almost always resprout and grow anew. So they actually help protect from fire.
Were you able to salvage any charcoal from the burnt forestations around?
Oh, tons. I have harvested so much charcoal. In fact, I have some video of just this past week. I went out and just chipped off some more because I needed some in my studio. And I videotaped it. I was like, oh, I should make a little reel for Instagram or something about that. But I mean, not that there's a silver lining to having a wildfire, but I don't have to ever buy charcoal again. There's plenty out there.
Now, you've had obviously lots of collections and exhibitions and of that nature with all of the materials that you use. I'm wondering what you're currently working on now, Rebecca.
Right now, I am working on some large-scale cardboard and paper bag collages. Like I said, I don't buy any commercially made paper products, so I'll only use materials that have been used or disposed of. And Uh, let's see. I'm I have an upcoming show at the Brand Library and Arts Center in Glendale, and it's a juried exhibition of all works on paper that opens in early July.
And you're currently an artist in residence at the 18th Street at the Airport Art Complex, which we know something about now through your friends in Santa Monica.
Yes, yes. Claudia Concha, yeah. Yes, I'm an artist in residence there, 18th Street, which is one of the largest residency programs in Southern California. And yes, we are housed in a historic airplane hangar at the Santa Monica Airport, which was used, the hangar we're in was used to build the Douglas DC-3 airplane. Don't quote me on that. I think that was what it was called. Those were the planes that flew during World War II. And then the airplane hangar was just vacant for decades. And then an artist and a gallerist got together and built it into studio spaces. So now it houses about 25 to 30 artists in the building, which is really nice. It's a really nice community of artists.
You told me some of your interests when we spoke before, Rebecca. I'm wondering what you do now when you're not doing your art and family activities. What's your go-to? Is there anything about Rebecca Youssef that your followers may not know? You know, besides that you like swimming and martial arts and boxing, which you've done, what else would they not know about you?
Well, yes, I'm very sporty. I play tennis every week with some friends, and so I'm a prolific trash talker. Something people may not know about me, except my friends. But yeah, in my free time, I'm mostly out hiking in my back canyon. That's just what I love to do. It's where I kind of recharge, rejuvenate. I love being back there. I love just, taking my phone with me. I have an app that helps me identify plants. And so I'm just back there IDing plants. And right now there's a lot of the wildflowers that have been blooming are seeding. So I'm back there collecting seeds from my poppy flowers and ceanothus, mountain lilac. So yeah, it's just kind of, I either want to have my hands in paint or in dirt.
And have any of your children followed in your art interests?
All three of my children are very creative in very different ways. My middle child, my daughter, Caroline, she really likes to draw and sketch and reminds me of me. I think she does it as a way to decompress and de-stress. And I think that's kind of how I came to drawing. When I first moved to Hawaii, it was kind of stressful, and drawing really helped me relax early on. It was very therapeutic, and she has found that as well.
You probably spend most of your time in the studio then, between your studio and nature itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have a pretty regimented schedule of waking up, coffee, getting the kids out to school, to my studio until I have to pick them up from school. So
that's a typical day.
Yep, that's a typical day.
Well, before you go, Rebecca, tell everybody how they can find you online and on social media.
I am on Instagram at Rebecca.Youssef_studio, as well as on Facebook at the same handle. I'm also on Pinterest. Oh my gosh, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm Twitter, you name it, I'm there. And then my website, RebeccaYoussef.com.
And that is Youssef.
Correct. 2 S's, 1 F.
2 S's, 1 F, and Rebecca is Rebecca too. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time and being my guest. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, me too.
If you have a moment to leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, that will help others find the show. You can also post your comments, questions, and suggestions for guests on our Instagram account, which is the AART Podcast with 2 A's, and also by emailing us at hollowellstudios@gmail.com. And coming up on the show in July will be the movie poster artist Akiko Styrenberger and the artist Catherine Andrews. Until next week, thank you for listening.